Hello everyone, I really welcome you all on this particular channel. And today we are going to learn the parts of the Indian Constitution. This becomes very important for all of us to understand because in the recent past we all have seen whether it is the UPSC Civil Service examination or EPF examination or even the CAPF in every single paper, whether it is the state's exams or the center's exam, every time this question is coming either to match the following, either in terms of match the following questions or maybe directly asking in statements the parts of the new constitution. And therefore, it becomes very important for all of us to understand the chronology and remember it for a very long period of time, right? So, without wasting any time, today we are going to start as soon as possible. Now, but before I begin, I must tell you that whenever जब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन किसी कंट्री का बनाया जाता है तो देर इज नॉट अ रैंडम सीक्वेंस जो कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऐसे ही कहीं उठा करके कोई भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना दिया जाता है नॉट पॉसिबल एट ऑल द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इज अ वेरी गुड लीगल डॉक्यूमेंट सो इट मस्ट बी इन अ वेरी गुड सीक्वेंस ऑल्सो और उस सीक्वेंस को आज हम समझने की कोशिश करेंगे सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट द इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन आई हैव इन फ्रंट ऑफ मी this particular thing that is called as the parts of the Indian Constitution. अगर हम पहले पार्ट की बात करें तो अगर मैं इफ आई एज अ पर्सन इज ट्राइंग टू कॉन्स्टिट्यूट अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अगर मैं बनाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ तो वो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन किस टेरिटरी के लिए बनाऊंगा क्या ये पॉसिबल है कि मैं उस टेरिटरी को डिफाइन किए बिना बना दूं नॉट पॉसिबल एट ऑल तो उसके बाद हम पहला पार्ट देखते हैं दैट टॉक्स अबाउट द फर्स्ट पार्ट द यूनियन एंड इट्स टेरिटरीज वो कौन सी टेरिटरीज हैं जिसके लिए ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वैलिड है नाउ if there is a constitution for a particular territory, तो ये constitution किन लोगों पे applicable होगा? That is also very important for us. Therefore, in the part two of the Indian constitution, we see the citizenship, provisions for the citizenship. Now, since we have a constitution, these people who are residing in this particular region must be having some rights. Otherwise, there is no point in having a constitution. And therefore, we see the fundamental rights of the Indian Constitution has been mentioned in Part 3, right after the citizenship itself, that what all rights are being uh, exercised by the citizens itself. But if the fundamental rights are there, other than that, what is the responsibility of the state? Because ultimately, what is the see? These are the rights being enjoyed by the people. But what is the responsibility of the state? What the state will do for the people? And that is what we see has been mentioned in part 4 of the Indian Constitution, the directive principles. These are the directives that have been given by the constitution makers to the people, to the government as a directive as to what is to be done for the people of the country. Now, the state is doing so much for the state, for the people of this country, but what we as citizens are doing for the country, and therefore we to have some responsibilities, some duties that is fundamental duties that has been mentioned in part 4A of the Constitution. This capital A represents that this particular part has been added later on by 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 and it has been recommended by the Swaran Singh Committee. Right after that, we also see that we as a nation are enjoying the federal, we as a nation are a federal units, right? Federation. We are a federation. So the power division has to happen. Therefore, if we talk about these, all things has to be done. Who will look after all these responsibilities? Therefore, in the part 5 of the Indian Constitution, we see that it has the powers and the administrative units, or how who all will be part of the union has been mentioned in part 5 of the Constitution. But we also see that there has been a division between the center and the respective federal units also, and those federal units are none other than the smaller states in which we see that power has been divided. That has been mentioned in just next part of the states. The sixth part, the fifth part has been mentioned for the union, and the sixth part has been mentioned for the states. Now, if we talk about the seventh part of the Indian Constitution that has been repealed by Seventh Amendment Act of 1956 during the State Reorganization Commission was established when the State Reorganizations Act was introduced. Now, we have talked about the union, we have talked about the state. What next? There must be some territories. So, if we talk about the territories, there is entire India. that we have talked about in the union. Who will look after that? Then there comes the states. Now, right after that, there comes the union territories. They are also the territories, but does not come directly under the states. So who will administer that? So what all administrative units will be there, how the bureaucracy will work, how the legislature will be there, and some other things have been mentioned in Part 8 of the Indian Constitution that talks about and deals with the union territories. But we talked about union, the states, union territories. Then comes the third level of government. There comes the panchayats. So, panchayats play a very important role, and that has been mentioned in Part 9 of the Constitution. These are the third level and third tier of the government, and this has been mentioned and this has been added to the Constitution through 73rd Amendment Act. So this is the third level of government that we see. This is the local level of government in the rural areas, but at par with the local level government of panchayats in the rural areas, we also have local level government in the urban areas that represents and that is administered by the municipalities, and that has been mentioned in just next provision, just next part, that is part 9A. Now we talked about this union, we talked about the state, the union territories, then panchayats, then municipalities. But even after that, there is another smaller unit beyond this, and that we see the cooperatives. The cooperative societies, they are also a kind of group of people. They have to be administered in a certain way, and that part, and for that we also have a special provision, Part 9B of the Constitution, just next to that. So if we see, this all things have been given in a chronology. So in a similar way, the local level administration, in a any organization, if it is to be administered by so many people, they are administered in a cooperative manner, in cooperative by administering and registering themselves as a cooperative societies. Now we talked about all these things. The next part comes all those territories which are neither states, neither union territories or panchayats or cooperatives. Then who else will administer? There are some special territories that needs to be looked after very with a very delicate manner, in a very delicate manner, because the people who are living in these particular areas have a certain kind of customs, traditions, and way of living, and that should not be disturbed. That should be preserved, their culture should be preserved. And that is why in part 10 of the Constitution, we see those territories, that is, scheduled areas and tribal areas. Now, is it really possible? We are running such a big administration in a country. Is it really possible that we'll be able to do it, without defining the relationship between the union and the states? Because since we are a federation, there's a power division has to happen. So how these power divisions will look in terms of administration, in terms of legislative powers and some other powers, right? Right, legislative and bureaucratic powers, executive powers, in fact. So this has been mentioned in part 11 of the Indian Constitution. But how these administration will happen, how these union government and the state governments will work if they do not have finances. So financial property, contract, and suits. So this particular provision for earning, how the power division, the financial powers will be distributed, who will look after the contingency fund of India, how the consolidated fund of India will be there, and how the financial devolution from the state and the union territories, or maybe the states and the center will happen, including the Finance Commission of Article 280. We see in Part 12 of the Indian Constitution. But is it really possible for any country to run and earn these finances without doing trade and commerce? No. So therefore, we see the next part that comes is part 13 of the Indian Constitution that talks about the trade, commerce, intercourse within the territories of India. So any trade that happens within the territories of India, that is being dealt in part 13 of the Indian Constitution, right? Now, we have talked about the legislature, executive, and all these things. But is it really possible for any governments to run without a bureaucratic structure that we have heard was being called by the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel as the steel frame of India? No. Therefore, we see that civil services, about the civil services, we see that Part 14 of the Indian Constitution mentions that how these civil services will be recruited, how will their postings will be there, and what all provisions related to them has been mentioned in this particular part 14 of the Indian Constitution. Services and unions and the states. Now, what if these people, these services people, do also have problems because they are part of the administration? So who will look after their problems? Because they cannot be treated, or they cannot go directly into the, in a general court for their administrative problems. Therefore, a specific kind of tribunals has been mentioned, and that has been mentioned in Part 14A of the Indian Constitution. The part of tribunals, specific kind of administrative tribunals have been mentioned, and some other tribunals which are specialized tribunals or judicial uh, kind of structures which deal with the special kind of things. Right now, we have talked about a lot. Since we are a democracy, have you ever talked about the recruitment? I mean, have you talked about the elections? No. Till this point, we talked about the steel frame of India, the direct bureaucracy, who are not elected, rather selected. But what about those people, who are running these administration of the union, the state, the union territories, the panchayats, municipalities? There must be someone to look after them. Therefore, there's a provision of elections mentioned in Part 15 of the Indian Constitution. It includes the Election Commission of India's provisions and some other provisions as well. Now, we have talked about a lot. These elections have been there, but we need to have certain, there are different kind of class divisions in our society, including SCs, STs, OBCs, and some other classes also. They need protection because they need certain special kind of protection, and for that we have special kind of bodies, mm, to look after them, and that has been mentioned just right after elections in Part 16 of the Indian Constitution. But we as a nation is trying to unify our country on the basis of a language. And in fact, not only that, we also have different kind of people in our country who speak different kind of languages. Therefore, there must be some provision in the constitution itself to protect their, different kind of languages, the special languages, as I talked about in Part 10 of the Constitution, the scheduled areas and tribal areas. Therefore, we see there's a provision of Part 17, given in Part 17 of the Indian Constitution, that talks about the official languages. What all official languages will be used at the Supreme Court, High Court, or maybe in the administration, in the Parliament, in the legislature, in the executive, and also obviously the judiciary. But what if, right after all that, there comes certain emergencies where needs, you know, to protect the integrity and unity of the nation, and for that, our constitution makers were wise enough to inculcate this provision as well, that talks about emergency provisions in Part 18 of the Indian Constitution. Now, the next part, is talking about the miscellaneous, the 19, not that important. But right after that, there is the most important part of the Indian Constitution that talks about Part 20, and that mentions only one article, the amendment to the Constitution. What if we, as the people of the country, and in fact the administrators or the legislatures, feel that there is a need to make certain changes in the Constitution to make it a living document, to make it suitable for the present environment? And for that, we see it, the provision has been mentioned in Part 20 of the Indian Constitution, the amendment of the Constitution, Article 368. Now, Part 21 were, containing certain temporary provisions during the induction of the Constitution when it was being adopted way back in 1950, and then Part 22, not that important. So, this was all from my side. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I would like you to, view this particular video multiple times in order to get this sequence into your mind. And whenever some question comes, which is coming regularly, you should be able to attempt it and mark it correct. Thank you all. Thank you for this.